Major General Leonard, sir, welcome to the Military Leader Podcast. And thanks for taking the time to connect with this community of leaders. It's great to see you again. How are you?
I'm doing great, Drew. Thanks. And please call me Brooke.
Okay. All right. You're making the transition away from active duty there. Is it going through a little bit of a change?
Yeah, it's really been fun though. I've enjoyed it. It's given me lots of opportunities to learn and grow, which I love doing. I tried to do that during my career, and it's fun to do that in this next chapter.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's good. A little bit later, I do want to talk about that and how that transition's been for you and maybe some advice you have for folks getting out. But first, just to get listeners oriented, if you don't mind, would you explain a little bit of the arc of your career and what stands out as you look back? Because you've been able to do some pretty extraordinary things in the Air Force, haven't you?
I've had a really fun time, and I'm thankful to the nation for the opportunity to serve. I guess I would break down my career into probably three or four phases. The initial phase, I was able to learn. I grew up as an F-16 pilot, and so a lot of tactical learning going on, and I grew up in that community. And really, at that point in my life, I learned about excellence, focusing on the mission, working in teams. So those were kind of some of the lessons from early on. And then later on in my life, I got into some really great, what I would call educational and inspirational opportunities. I went to the weapons instructor course at Nellis Air Force Base, kind of like the Air Force version of Top Gun, if you will. And I also got to go to the School of Air and Space Power Studies. And that's where I learned a lot of strategic thinking. And I went to the Army War College, lots of other professional military education. And so kind of in the middle part of my career, I really learned how to think. I learned how to team, and I learned how to do joint warfare. That was sort of a big thing that was coming on in the wake of, some failures that we had historically as a military. And so that was really big in education. But practically, I got to learn about that. And it was just a really neat part of my career as I continued to hone my tactical skills, but try to bring those up to the operational level and integrate and build larger components and be able to get after warfighting and training and things that we do here in the military. And then there's probably the strategic part of my career where I started command at higher levels. I had an opportunity to be the senior military assistant to the Secretary of the Air Force. And so I basically had, an incredible seat right next to the leading decision makers in our service and in other services, and be able to kind of see and learn what it's like to lead a really large organization and tackle, about every problem in the world and take advantage of a lot of opportunities as well. And then the other part I would say is I've had several combat tours, got to lead in combat both in Iraq and Afghanistan at several different levels, and really being able to see kind of all that training being brought to bear by just incredible military members and working together with other organizations, the host nation, and really getting after upholding our values while protecting our country is just amazing. So that's kind of my career basically in four different frames.
Right. So, as you know, I went to the Air Force Academy and then cross commissioned. And one of the things that I was thinking at the time is that I was comparing the leadership experiences that I would have in the Army versus the leadership experiences that I might have in the Air Force. And the Army tends to present those leadership opportunities very readily and upfront. You go through
Absolutely.
infantry school and then Ranger school. And then in my case, I got my platoon in the 82nd Airborne in April of 2000, just months before 9/11 kicked off and we were off to the races. But what I didn't end up answering was what leadership looks like in the Air Force, in the cockpit. Familiar when you're an F-16 pilot as a lieutenant, as a captain, what's your leadership journey there, and how does leadership factor in when you're operating as an individual pilot flying a plane?
Yeah, Drew, I've always been impressed with the way the Army really gets after leadership and offers incredible opportunities at a very young age. You'll see that in a couple places in the Air Force, but writ large, those leadership opportunities usually come a little bit later. But as you are talking about flying, leadership begins with leading yourself, right? Understanding who you are, what your core values are. And I would also say that the coin of leadership is decision making. In other words, there's lots of different ways that people lead, but in the end, I think it's about making daily great decisions aligned with the mission. And so the elements of leading yourself, making great decisions, you know, with a focus on accomplishing the mission, you see that everywhere. And obviously that's really important when you're going 500 miles an hour and bad guys are shooting at you or simulated shooting at you. So that was really important to have self-discipline, to understand your weaknesses, understand your strengths, always have an open mind and trying to learn and get better. One of the things we do in the Air Force after we fly is debrief. And a lot of times the debrief is longer than the pre-mission planning, longer than the flight itself, just because we're trying to squeeze, every ounce of knowledge we can out of the JP-8 we just burned. So, and then you grow from there. So you're leading yourself in your own airplane. You always fly at least in pairs, and so you can upgrade to flight lead, which I did as a lieutenant. And now you're responsible for yourself and somebody else, and then you just build from there. As a 4-ship flight lead, now you're responsible for 3 others, and then larger missions and packages. But one of the really neat things that I learned very early on as a pilot is the importance of being open to critique and trying to get better. And in the debrief, we say, the rank stops at the door. And so as a young lieutenant, I was leading flights, and maybe my squadron commander, an 05, was in the flight itself, and I was responsible to get him and back, accomplish our training objectives or our combat mission, as it were. And then I would critique how he did that. And so, but that was kind of the way we did it. So the rank was off, and we tried to be very professional, but at the same time, we wanted to learn and grow. And so that was just a really special opportunity, and it taught me that no matter how old you are, no matter how experienced you are, you need to be open to learning and growing, and you need to afford other people the opportunity to give you feedback, and you need to be willing to stand up and give feedback even though you might be junior in rank, and that all the little things, over time add up. And it's important to tackle those things, take advantage of those opportunities, those learning moments, as well as kind of break bad habits if you want to be good, if you want to be, the best military in the world, best officer, best person.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, our mission, what we're going to be called to do certainly demands that. And what I love about the way that organizational leadership works is that it comes down so much to the daily moment-to-moment interactions that the leader is having with the followers, that the team is having with one another. And you mentioned, and as you were talking, I was thinking about you said the 2-ship, right? You have even 2 pilots. In an F-16 in the case, there's only 1 pilot per aircraft, and so there's just 2 people up there flying together. And in that, as you described, in that scenario, there may be a flight lead, right? But there's no clear, I mean, you're working as a team. I mean, you are equals up there because it's going to come down to your piloting skills, your coordination skills. And I think that ability to influence our peers and our colleagues is maybe an undervalued, maybe a skill that we don't necessarily develop and appreciate as we go through the career, at least in my perspective and experience, because we focus on what's my opportunity to command and what's the next level, and I've got this team beneath me, right? But you've got this opportunity to lead your peers and have responsibility as well, and so it just comes to mind as you highlight that, and it really comes forth in those situations there where you're just up there, 2 guys or two pilots flying in the open blue sky.
Yeah, Drew, I think there's a couple really neat points, that you bring up there. I think the first one is, you're always going to have somebody that's sort of responsible for planning or, is sort of the lead or coordinating agent. Sometimes we use coordinating authority. But this idea that you bring up about mutual support, where you're both supporting each other for the goodness and the accomplishment of the mission itself. And you see that, in a 2-ship, as you mentioned. You might have a flight lead who's ultimately responsible for the conduct of the flight. Maybe they've been in charge of planning that mission. But when you're out there and let's say you're attacked by, another enemy formation, whoever's in the best position to maneuver and achieve the kill needs to do that, while whoever is maybe more defensive based on the geometry, needs to defend accordingly. And so there's a role and mission, but you're both working to put each other in the best possible situation, survive, defeat the threat, accomplish the mission. So I think that's a really important point there for that. And then I think the other thing that's really important is this peer leadership, that you bring up. It's sort of elevating each other. And I've always said to folks that the team that you're on is more important than the team you lead. So a lot of times, probably after our first, command or our first time we're in charge, we're in the middle, right? We're leading from the middle all the way up to, even the President of the United States is leading from the middle, on the world stage, if you will. In other words, you have someone that you're reporting to, you have people that are reporting to you. And so this idea that, I'm going to lead this team really well and look out for them, that's super important. That's part of your job. But people forget that team that you're leading that's been given to you to accomplish a mission is part of a larger team. And as the commander, you need to be about that larger team. And so how does your team help the larger team? And so I always say the team that you're on is more important than the team you lead, to make sure you always have that outward and others focus.
Mm-hmm. That is exactly, that's the first lesson that was, let's see, it took a minute for me to learn it in brigade command. In fact, even just, so 2 years ago. And this is part of the leveling up, I think, that we go through as we come into contact with different echelons. But in brigade command, I started off looking down and in, and essentially treating it like I was the only game in town. And so then my boss at some point said, hey man, you're part of the division, right?
Right. Exactly.
So you probably need to consider what's going on and what my priorities are. And so he was good about it. It was subtle, and it wasn't a career-ending moment, but it was one of those things. I'm like, oh yeah, gosh, I should probably be a little bit less self-centered with my with my decisions and what I'm thinking about.
Right. Yeah.
So
you could apply that at any level. The 2-ship has to fit into the 4-ship. The brigade has to fit into the division, has to fit into the corps. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, what do you miss about flying, or what did you enjoy most about flying?
Well, I got into flying because I love teamwork. There's a lot of folks that got into flying because they love, defying gravity and slipping the surly bonds of Earth, if you will. And that's fun too, don't get me wrong. I mean, it's just glorious to be able to do that. But I got into it because I love being on teams. I grew up playing a lot of sports. I love kind of bringing folks together and getting after a real serious mission, working hard in practice, and getting to game time and performing well. So that was a passion of mine. So that's kind of what I got into, and I saw that as a very intense part of the Air Force. And so that part of the Air Force was what I wanted to go into, be a part of a flying squadron. And so I was fortunate enough to be able to do that. And that's really my favorite thing to do. And I would tell you, it kind of ebbs and flows, whether you're in the military or now I'm retired. But it really comes down to the quality of the people you work with, their willingness to be selfless and work as a team, and then the intensity and the importance of your mission. And so that's really what changes it for me. And so flying, especially flying in combat where, you have really good people, you have to work together as a team. You're supporting a team on the ground, and so a team even larger than maybe your flight or your formation. And you're protecting, folks on the ground. You're flying and fighting with the American values, and you're doing it in such a way to protect, the homeland either directly or indirectly. And so, it doesn't get any better than that. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, that sort of flying and that sort of teamwork I miss a lot. There have been times in my life short of flying where, we've gotten after really important missions, as an example, standing up Space Command. A lot of really great folks, again, working on standing up the 11th Combatant Command. We had a Space Command before 9/11. We only were allowed to have 9. And so when 9/11 happened, we transitioned Space Command at that time to NORAD Northcom, so Northern Command, responsible for protecting the homeland. And then the laws changed and we understood how important, the high ground was in space. And so another good example of where I really enjoyed teamwork. So I guess to answer your question, it's not really that I miss flying, although every once in a while, particularly, like today where it's overcast and cloudy and, it's always clear on top is what they say. So to be able to
Mm-hmm.
get up there in the sun's really fun, but really it's the teamwork. And I'll tell you that ebbs and flows. There's probably nothing as intense as teamwork in combat, but there's things that come close. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's really what I relish. That's really what I'm about and
Mm-hmm.
enjoy.
Yeah. Do you remember your first combat mission?
I do. Yeah, absolutely.
Where was that?
So it's over Iraq. We deployed as really a half of a deployment package in support of F4s. And so it was the last time F4s flew in combat. And we were put together with them in terms of a hunter-killer kind of formation. In other words, we'd go out there, detect enemy threats, and take care of them. And it was at a time where we were protecting both the north and south portions of Iraq and at the same time kind of denying Saddam Hussein capabilities to maneuver military assets around. And so it was Northern Watch and Southern Watch was what it was called. And so there were some stipulations we put on him in terms of what he could put down there, what that equipment could do. And so here I am, a brand new lieutenant, and we were doing what we called an orientation flight, which means we didn't have a critical part of the mission. We were supposed to understand how to get up, get gas from the tanker, follow all the right procedures, get into southern Iraq, understand, the comm, all the channels you had to be on, and the procedures of how to fly and deconflict from everything else that was going on and get familiar with the terrain and so forth. And so we were doing that, and my flight lead got lit up, we used to call it. So you have a radar warning receiver that starts chirping at you if any enemy radar starts attacking. And so the radar is just a precursor for them to figure out a firing solution. And in this case, it was a radar. And so Saddam was not allowed to do that to any aircraft, wasn't allowed to have any radars that were on. And so I was 9 seconds from dropping a 500-pound bomb on that radar site on my very first combat mission. So the radar turned off. My flight lead called me off. My blood pressure went from about, over one back down a couple notches. But yeah, that was a pretty memorable first time in combat.
That's sporty. That's good. Did you feel like you were ready for that moment based on the training you had gone through?
Yeah, I would say I was barely ready for
Mm-hmm.
that. And I think that's such a good question. That's such a good point, because one of those things I learned from all the different combat assignments, and then also some mentors that I had early on in my life, particularly my very first squadron command, which was at the weapons school, was, do we prepare our formations for the realistic challenges they're going to face in combat, whatever that is, whether it's loss of a buddy, losing someone in your formation, whether it's actually, engaging the enemy, and what is that like, and how realistically do we do that? I've never been in a sandstorm before. How do you train to something like that? But I flew in a sandstorm in combat, and it was really scary. I've lost brothers and sisters in combat. And so how do you prepare for that? We do, lose people in training, unfortunately, as well. I had a mentor that taught me that we need to use those opportunities, even though that's a really hard opportunity, to prepare the formation to go forward in battle. And his question to me was, if you were to die in combat, would you want your formation to take a knee or take the hill? And my response was obviously take the hill. And he presented that question to me after one of our organizations had lost somebody in peacetime. And his point to me was, how are you using this opportunity to ready your forces for, potentially losing somebody in combat, but still going forward? My initial decision as a young squadron commander was to take a knee. It's peacetime. Let's figure out what happened. let's call in the right folks to care for the people mentally and physically. And you still have to do that, obviously, but where are your opportunities to maybe start looking at, am I ready to continue the mission? And at peacetime, how do I practice that? And that was an example that I've expounded upon many, many times. I was in Korea as the wing commander at Osan Air Base, and we say, we're ready to fight tonight. Are we ready to fight tonight? Are we ready to fight on a Sunday morning? In 1950, that's when the North Koreans came across the line to start the Korean War. So everybody's having a good time on the weekend. What does Sunday morning look like in terms of readiness? What does Thursday afternoon, after we've flown our jets, for 4 days, really hard, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, maybe we have a configuration that we need to train some young guys, but that's not the wartime configuration. And so our configuration doesn't match what we would generate in war. Our jets are maybe a little bit broken because maintenance has been generating the sorties and not necessarily fixing the aircraft as we've gone through that week. So are we ready? And how do we make sure we're constantly ready to fight tonight? So I just tell you all that to say that making sure you're ready to do what you do has become what was very important to me. And that realistic readiness was important. And I saw it for the first time on that sortie where I was like, all right, I was ready. I had all my switches in the right position. I mean, it was a surprise. There were some things I could have done better, and we debriefed those. But I felt like I was barely there, and that was a really critical time. My flight lead, could have been targeted. I might have needed to take out that threat to protect our formation. And so from then, I wouldn't say necessarily from then on, but that was really one of those times that just started me down this path. And I mentioned several other kind of touch points along the way that just enforced to me that as a leader, you are responsible for making your organization ready for the worst day. And you need to make sure they're ready for that today, because you never know what might happen and what you might be called upon to do tomorrow.
Yeah, no, absolutely. In Lawrence Gonzalez, in his book Deep Survival, I'm not sure if you've had the chance to read it.
I haven't.
It's got the best subtitle of any book that I've ever read. The subtitle is "Who Lives, Who Dies, and Why." And so, yeah, it's pretty good. But
awesome.
I highly recommend Deep Survival. But he goes through survival scenarios and, in a case study look, picks them apart and to determine what traits and what factors led to someone surviving a plane crash, an avalanche, lost in the woods versus someone who doesn't. It's a fascinating book. But in there, he would call what you experienced an emotional bookmark. The body,
yes.
That you go through some event, and for the rest of your life, it becomes a trigger. It's come cemented in your psyche, and it's something you end up over and over again. And I think those are important to capture and learn from. But also, those emotional bookmarks usually come out of nowhere. You usually get surprised by them. And so can you create the conditions to train people ahead of that, right, and get them prepared for those times? It is can be challenging for leaders to sense the organization and whether or not they're ready, because there's so many factors, right? I mean, there's a human dynamic, there is the equipment dynamic, there's the dynamic of the enemy and what their capability is at the time, and et cetera, et cetera. But I think you bring up a great point about the leader knowing when to reach down and pull the unit out of the slump, right? When they hit a trough, when is it time to say, get back up on the horse, right? And can be a delicate thing, but the leader's got to be in tune for that. And it comes down to talking to people, getting advice from mentors, your sergeant major, your senior enlisted advisor. How much sleep does the leader get to be able to sense those kind of things and make those kind of decisions? And the story that I was thinking about is an unfortunate one also, but we were going through a national training center rotation and lost a soldier due to a training accident. And so we had to tell the company, let the company commander do that, and then we had a discussion about when we were going to resume training, because we were on day 4 and we were going to continue the rotation, period.
Right.
And so the scenario was fortunate. It was a fortunate timing in that the organization learned a lesson, and they had this pressure of continuing a fight, because if it had happened in home station, you wouldn't have had the same type of pressure. But so they got to learn that, be it a tragedy. I mean, it always is, but these will happen. Tragedy is a predictable challenge, and if you're listening now and you're in a company or a squadron, you will lose soldiers, you will lose airmen, and if there's a battle drill to go through, the casualty response battle drill is definitely one to rehearse with the team. So don't wait another day before you figure out how you're going to respond to that tragedy.
No, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you can just look back at history. I think a lot of times we look back at history, we look back at the way things have been, and for some reason we forget about that when we forecast into the future. And so there are known knowns when it comes to things like that. And kind of to your point on, it is a complex problem set, but I use, I've always used Peter Drucker's, he has a book called Effective Executive. So back at you on the book recommendations.
Yeah,
but
good.
Very simple, about 100 pages, like 14-point font, so you can read it in about a weekend. But he has 5 questions for an effective executive, a leader. And the first one is, what should we be doing? So not what do we do, not what can we do, but what should we do? So this is the reorientation on what is the threat, what's my mission, not what do I want to do or what I'm equipped to do, but what should I do? So it's a very good first question. And then how do I do it? So do you understand the process, the equipment, the manpower? Do you understand kind of the full formula to getting to readiness, in this case, to do your mission? And then how are you doing? So how do you do it? How are you doing at it? And, there's lots of different ways to do it. I really recommend rehearsal. My dad was in the Army, and he used to say, unless it's rehearsed, it's not a capability. And so, but you can understand that. You can test, train it. I mean, there's lots of different ways to do that. But so how do you do it? How are you doing? And then how do you know? So what is your actual process of figuring that out and making sure that that's testing and figuring out where you are, kind of shining the flashlight in all the dark nooks of your mission set, if you will. And then the last one is one of my favorites as well. It's how do you learn and how do you share? There's another brigade probably doing the same thing you're doing or close to. Similar equipment, similar mission. In the when we were standing that up, there was a couple of organizations alongside us at Luke Air Force Base, namely Hill Air Force Base. And so I would talk to my operations group commander and say, hey, do you have a dialogue with the operations group commander up there that is flying just like we are? Same thing with our maintenance group commander. And so how do you share that? Like if we've learned something, I think we have the responsibility as leaders to share that with other people, obviously pick their brain as well and learn from them. And so what should you do? How do you do it? How are you doing? How do you know? And then how do you learn and share? And it is a complicated problem, but as the leader, I think that's a very useful framework. I'm trying to break down that very complex problem into an understanding that you need to have as a leader to see those gaps and then correct and make sure you're realistically ready.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Agree. And that it is a great book. Peter Drucker, the founder of modern management, really.
Right.
So you mentioned the F, and you experienced that transition out of the F-16 and then brought on the F, which is just a remarkable thing to be able to be a part of. So what a seminal moment in the kind of this generation of the Air Force. But it's also a major transition. So, and as well as the Space Command transition that you mentioned a minute ago. So, what advice would you have transition in whatever field that they're in, and how can they best navigate those major changes?
Yeah. Well, I would tell you, being involved in something that's labeled a transition is a gift. A lot of people see it maybe as a burden or like a big rock, but it's a gift because really we should always be changing and adapting. The enemy, context, your equipment, everything's constantly changing. And so if you think you're not in a period of change or you don't need to be thinking about transition dynamics and how to lead through that, you're probably sleeping through something really important. So it is actually, I think, a gift as a leader for something to be labeled as a transition, because your organization's mindset immediately starts to welcome a lot of the attributes it needs. Now, as humans, we don't like change, so it's going to be hard. But to acknowledge it and have, sort of the supporting mindset, as well as sometimes, the extra resources needed to be able to do that, and the focus and the leeway often from higher level headquarters to be able to do things differently. I've seen that better when it's labeled a transition. So I think that's, first of all, look at it as a gift and a great opportunity. And I would tell you too, like, if you hate change, you're going to hate irrelevancy, and you're absolutely going to hate defeat. And so if we are not in that mindset, we are not going to be able to continue to protect really the free society across the world that I think the United States really focuses on doing. So anyways, it's a gift. Now, I think the important part is, as you transition, you need to think about it holistically. So oftentimes technology and sometimes organizations are the seed of that change. Like, in other words, you stand up a new command, as in Space Command. That was an organizationally induced change, if you will. The F-35 was technology induced. And so when it's technology, you need to think about, okay, what are the organizations that need to change because I now have different technology? And then the third part of that triad is how we think. That could be tactics, that could be doctrine, that could just be your mindset on how you process decisions and do stuff. So technology, organization, and then thinking.
And was that, and it just makes me think for a second about the responsibility you had in the time. As you're bringing on that aircraft, do you also have then the professional responsibility to figure out how to fight it? I mean, is the Air Force relying on you to figure out how to employ this thing?
Well, in some cases, yes. In some cases, no. For me, it was yes, because I was actually an F-35 core pilot. And so earlier in my career, before I was the commander at Luke, I was at the weapons school as an instructor, and they selected a handful of us. And so we actually went down and flew the simulators at Lockheed Martin, and they said, this is what the jet is probably going to be like. And we wrote the entire suppression of enemy air defenses tactics manual. And even if I didn't have that opportunity at Luke, we had more aircraft than any other organization at that time inside the Air Force, really inside of any service and any country. And we actually were training other countries, but we were all there trying to figure out, how do we best teach it? And we had to develop tactics, because how are you going to develop pilots without the tactics to teach them? But the one thing, and this is part of your sort of leading transitions that was really important, was the organizational piece. And so technology-induced change in the case of the F-35. And before I was at Luke, I was actually the commander of the F-16 weapons squadron. And I saw how we integrated the F-35 into the Air Force. And we did it in kind of piecemeal fashion. And so as we started developing the F-35 plan, people just used, my least favorite tool on Microsoft Word is find and replace, right? Like, this is how we've always done it. Like, I hate that. And so I was like, no, let's think through this and try to learn from how we did the F-35. And so what we did was we did consecutive developmental and then operational test. And then we made sure we stood up the weapons school pretty much commensurate with as we stood up the training unit and as we stood up the operational units. And so that way we would have sort of the entire pipeline, even though it wouldn't be a very deep pipeline. We had the folks that were testing the aircraft out, finding out, is it doing what it's supposed to do? And then developing the tactics at the weapons school. That's their primary responsibility. And then translating that into a syllabus where we could bring on new F pilots, and then operationally employing that in operational squadrons. And so we kind of had the whole pipeline, from cradle to grave when it comes to a major weapon system. And I was able to get in front of a lot of the decision makers and take those lessons learned from not doing it as well as we could in the F-35 and actually applying those lessons to the F-35. And so fortunately, I got a lot of support and we're able to do that. And so to answer your question, we did some of that. I did a lot of that just based on the roles that I have. But we were doing that, while we were flying. We're sort of building the aircraft while we flew it. We were building the
Right.
syllabus while we flew it.
Right.
And then on the thinking part, I just wanted to highlight that, sort of I got the triad of transition is about technology, organization, and thinking and changing those things. So I had probably had about 20 hours in the FC by then, numerous combat deployments. And so now I get, old dog learning new tricks. And so I was a new 1-star at the time, and now I'm learning a new weapon system. And so I had lots of experience. I've been around the block a ton, but now I need to learn how to fly this new airplane. And it's kind of like learning a new language. People say that when you're learning a new language, you translate inside of your head
Uh-huh.
and then, and then speak it in that new language. And so that's kind of what I was doing. I would say, all right, tactically, I need to do this. How would I do this in the F? And then I would translate it into how it's done in the F, and then I would do it. And, I did okay with that. I got qualified as an instructor. And now we're starting to bring on new lieutenants. So before, what we'd been doing was you would take someone that's flown another fighter and you would then teach them how to fly the F. So similar to me. But when I was at Luke Air Force Base, we brought in the very first folks that had never flown fighter aircraft in their life. And we're going to put them in an F, right? So that kind of makes you worried as the wing commander a little bit.
Which costs how much again? How much is an
Yeah,
F-35?
exactly. Yeah, at that time, probably about 100 million. And, and you don't want to be the first one either. So there's a lot riding on that. And you see this, and there's no two-seaters, so they're going up by themselves. They do a lot of simulators ahead of time. And so, but it was interesting. So as an instructor, I got to teach these new guys. And it was amazing because the questions that they asked and how they oriented themselves on the tactics and how to execute those tactics was completely different than I did. And I learned a ton from them. And the community learned a ton from them and really their questions because they flew the F as an F. And all of us flew the F like I used to fly the F only better, or
Right.
as I flew the A-10 only faster, or we were just sort of translating what we used to do. And so when you're a leader and responsible for transition, make sure that you look at, hey, what are the technology changes? What are the organizational changes? And what are the changes in thinking? And it's really, I think, getting young folks in from the outside. It's really important on the Space Force, Space Command side of things. The inter-service transfers, I think, are really helping out the space organizations. Just inculcate, how do we do joint fires? I mean, the Army is really great at doing joint fires. Not to say that Guardians and folks in the Space Force aren't, but it's a different dynamic and it's a different perspective, and they've had different experiences and they think about it differently. And so I think that's key in successful transition. There's some other things we could go into if you'd like, but those are my big three.
Yeah, yeah. Those are valid, and it makes me think too about the leader's role in immediately recognizing that a transition is coming, and then also how to respond to that, right? Because sometimes the transition is thrust upon us. Maybe maybe the situation changes and you didn't expect it, or your training path changes and now you have 6 months less to do, to reach some goal or whatnot. We've been in those. And what I appreciate is really when it comes down to the leader's physical actions and the whole team. I just envisioning the whole team looking at a leader, and the news comes in, hey boss, this is the deal. We're deploying in 2 weeks or 2 days. I got to talk to Teddy Kleisner, who was brigade commander in the 82nd, friend of mine, and he deployed to Afghanistan in 2 days.
Wow.
He was out the door, and
yeah,
for the withdrawal.
amazing.
And in the 82nd, they trained that. But how does the leader respond in that moment? Because that very instant sets the climate for how everything else is going to go. And to your original point, if you see it as an opportunity, if you embrace that, and as a mentor of mine says, when things are at their craziest, that's when I need to be at my calmest, right? So there's
Right.
an inverse relationship from crazy to calm that the leader should have. And so it's so important, and it goes leading by example and staying calm in a crisis and all of these things. So you keep coming back to that. And then a culture that can respond to that change as well, because if a leader does it and that gives permission, almost like the team says, oh, wait, maybe this isn't such a big deal. It just grows in the organization, which is really great. If you would take a second to talk about some of those personal techniques that you use, and I'll use like meetings as an example, because you and I've had a conversation before about how you run meetings and how you open up a room so that you can get that feedback. And it's a little bit nerdy to talk about meeting dynamics. I'll admit that, but look, that's our job. That's what we do. A lot of our leadership is in meetings. And so how do you attack that when you were doing it?
Yeah, Drew, I think your point is very good. Like, you look at a meeting and it's like, oh, it's that admin stuff. In the Air Force, we call it queep, it just has this bad taste in your mouth. But if you think about it like this, a huddle is a meeting, right? Use a sports analogy. When the team takes a timeout, that's a meeting. And when you're back watching film, that's a meeting too. Meeting with your board, if you're a corporate executive, all those things are meetings. I guess what I'm trying to say is I wholeheartedly agree with you. Those are interactions with other people that are necessary to get our mission done. And so, that sounds like, calling the leader 101, like this is your job to make those things as, viable as possible to get after the intent. And so I guess one is just recognizing that it's an important thing. It's not sort of, death by PowerPoint, or I just have to do it because it's on the calendar. I would tell you right then, if the meeting's not important, if it's not pushing your mission forward, then cancel it. So, there's probably some triage that you need to do to make sure that you're taking time to do the really important things. So first of all, I'd look at it as an interaction, an opportunity, and you as the leader need to take full advantage of it, and you need to lead through it. And so part of it is triaging what's important, what's not important. I think second is what is important, making sure there's a common understanding. So having a good agenda, having a kind of why for the meeting and a focus for what you're trying to accomplish is really important. Otherwise, you and your staff are just going to start throwing all kinds of crazy things in there. If you can help people get prepared ahead of time, I know Jeff Bezos and Amazon, I think, are the exemplars in this area. They do their one-pager or a couple-page document ahead of time. Sometimes they read it right in the meeting. But the idea is get people's mindset, on what you're trying to accomplish, because otherwise they'll just make things up. That's what I've seen. So again, as your leader, trying to assure everybody understands and has kind of the same context. And then I think just as you transition, you might be running in from being on the range. Now you're going into a staff meeting, or you're coming out of, some counseling with one of your troops, and now you're, in this big audience. That transition, I think, is really important. And I've always tried to take the first 5-10 minutes of a meeting just to really trying to lighten the mood, trying to get people's mindsets of whatever they're down in business is been so far that day, to the up and out, the team, instead of working in the business, working on the business. And so getting their mindset right for what we're about to do. And in some cases, I might actually be pulling back the throttles and getting ready for folks to hear some really sad news, or some really surprising news. And so I probably have a good idea as the leader about, what's going to happen in the meeting, or what's on the agenda, or what's on my mind. And so trying to, kind of match impedance emotionally with people in the room, and then get everybody kind of settled in is really important. So, a lot of people look at that as small talk. I look at that as incredible preparation. It's kind of a warm-up, if you will, just like you wouldn't put, 3 plates on either side and start repping out some bench, you're going to warm up. So I think the warm-up's really important. And then I really just try to listen. So the less talking I do and the more listening, and also looking. People's body position, does that give me an idea of what kind of day they're having? What do they think about the subject at hand? And so just really trying to understand the humans in the meeting or in the interaction, in the huddle, whatever it is that we're doing that day. I think that's really important. And then as we talk through things, I'm very particular with a problem well defined is half solved. What's the issue? So, I've been in meetings, you hit a certain agenda item and people just start talking, and you've probably seen it too. We're like all over the map. And so I try to be a little bit of the referee and pull us back to, okay, what is exactly the issue we're trying to solve? And a lot of times, one, not everybody understands that that's exactly what we're talking about. Two, that's not really the issue. There's something deeper or adjacent. And so really trying to get us on exactly what is the problem. Let's define that first, and then we'll solve it. And so I keep pulling people back, like, hey, let's talk about what the problem is. Let's figure out, like, is that really the problem? And so I'll keep asking questions until I have a good understanding or have the team at least somewhat centered on what that is. And then I'll kind of let the solutioning go on. And that's, again, leaders speak last. I think Simon Sinek talks about that. And, as soon as you start providing input, you start shaping the solution, good or bad.
Right.
And so I really try to be quiet as long as I can. And then the other thing that I like to do is like if there's disagreement in the room, I like people to take the opposite person's perspective and trying to explain it to the other person's satisfaction. And so, in an Air Force wing, you have operations and maintenance. Those are sort of the best of kin, if you will. They fight a lot, but they work together. So I'll have my operations group commander talk about the concerns of the maintenance group commander and vice versa. And so trying to see the problem from the other person's side, I think, is really important. Making sure assumptions are clearly stated. Make sure the weighting of variables is clearly stated so that people understand, like, why are you thinking that? Like, what are the things you're assuming? How are you weighting sort of the different factors? And what that allows everybody to do is start seeing the calculations that are out there, and it just helps the group look at alternate potential solutions and why people are actually, talking or advocating the way they are. And then my last sort of favorite technique, if you will, is what I call a pre-mortem. The post-mortem is like after the patient died, what happened? A pre-mortem is asking the question, why is this going to fail? And the idea behind that is to allow people the space to disagree. Because if you said, well, what do you think about that? You're going to get one person. Every organization has the one person that's going to give you the God's honest truth. But everybody else is like, well, it's not going to fail, sir. And so I always like to force them to sort of disagree with where we're going, and then hopefully get their best thoughts on that. And that allows us to see things that we might have missed and make sure we're not closed-minded and tracking down a certain solution and not able to sort of get off of that path of thinking. So that pre-mortem, if you will, I think has been very helpful to me. So those are some of the techniques I use in a meeting. And then last but not least, definitely get out in writing what was decided. And I find that to be so critical and a step that's often missed. And at a minimum, have your exec take notes and then just quick put out, or whoever's responsible for the meeting also be responsible for meeting minutes. And a lot of times I've seen it, as a chief of staff at Space Command, people are like, we don't like doing these, it'll take forever. And I'm like, give me the decisions that were made and the tasks and who they're assigned to, and just shoot them to me in an email. We'll post them on SharePoint. And so it doesn't have to be formatted, a special way. But if you don't do that, as you come out of the meeting, people have 10 different ideas on what actually got decided. And now your organization is worse off than when it entered the meeting.
That's right. That's right.
Anyways, those are my kind of meeting tips, if you will. And, you caught me off of, I retired out of the chief of staff role. And so those are, battles that I fought all the time, but super important. Again, whether you're an operational or a staff, it's those and the interactions with just one-on-one with people, same kind of premise I think applies.
Yeah, yeah, those are great. I think I'm sure that hundreds of people right now who are listening to this just kind of put their heads down and are looking around the room trying not to be called on because they realize that they're not doing half or even a few of those. Me included, I think we like to think that, especially when you're the leader and everyone is assembled because you put it on your calendar and they're all coming here for you, you think that you've already achieved some success, when in fact you're probably starting from a deficit and you've got to claw your way back up to some type of equity because you pulled them out of their teams and they're, like you said, in your emotional state, you're coming off of one thing and straight into this. And how often do we really prepare for a meeting to make it a valuable experience? I know I didn't nearly as much as I should have. But your point about the leader's role in that is an exceptional one. And just to read back for you, what I feel like is underpinning that entire narrative is the idea that the leader's role is not to impart the advice, and you even said it directly. It is this assumption, is this belief that the best answer lies within the room, and it's the collective it's the collective process of the room and the added value of the room that's going to get there. And so the leader's job is to draw that out, assemble it, and challenge it, and put it into something that's going to carry the organization in a different direction, and maybe teach people along the way. It's a meeting is great when you can walk away saying, "Man, I really learned this, and this I didn't realize before."
Yeah, Drew, think about it. Like, this is an interesting phrase that I got from somebody else, was argue to learn rather than argue to win. And it's tangentially related to what we just discussed. In other words, so as a leader, your job is to create other leaders. And even in a meeting, you are teaching. And part of that is your decision-making process. Like I said, decision is the coin of the realm of leadership, in my opinion. And so how do you teach that? Well, like I said, getting the assumptions out, stating clearly how I'm weighting all the factors, and then what is actually my decision. Like, that's a very important thing to do. And to walk people through that process is really helpful. And then to add on to what you were saying is, you don't know everything, and if you think you do, well, then don't waste people's time, make the decision, put it out in an order, and move on. You know what I mean? Right. But yeah, if you go into that process, like, I'm going into this process to learn, and how do I really increase that learning for me and for the rest of the people on the team, is really important to get after the best decision that you can make. So yeah, super critical.
Yeah, absolutely, sir. Sometimes, it's shutting the heck up so that the other ideas can come in the room.
Absolutely.
So, and sometimes it takes an important question, and this actually is a good segue to someone I want to ask you about, because this gentleman who mentored both of us taught me the value of a good question, and that was Colonel Dale Condit. And we will actually, because I'm gonna.
Are you looking for something?
No, I got you. I lost video on you. Sorry.
Oh, okay. I just want to make sure.
Yeah. Can you still see me?
I can. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I lost video. It says live video will return when their internet improves, but it could be mine too. Sorry, I just went silent. I thought I totally lost you, so I didn't say anything.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you said you can and we will, and then you kind of stopped, and I wasn't sure if you were about to pull up a picture of him or something like that.
No, sorry about that.
That's all right.
Yeah, I lost video. Maybe it'll pop back up. Okay. Well, we'll just keep rolling then. All right. So I'll restate that one. And so, let's see, where we're at.
You kind of said somebody that's both mentored us.
Yeah.
The power of the question. You taught you kind of the power of the question.
Yeah, that's right. Okay. And so this makes me think about a mentor that we share in Colonel Dale Condit. And we could honestly do an entire episode about Dale and the impact that he's had on the force as a mentor, because he's literally mentored hundreds and hundreds of officers over the decades. But he played an important role in my life, and I know he has for you as well. And so, if you don't mind just describing maybe his mentorship and then the power that having a mentor as you go through your career, how important that is and the type of impact it can have.
Absolutely. I met the Dragon, as we call him, when I was at the Air Force Academy as a junior. And he had this just wonderful once a week opportunity where, they watched movies, read books, and really pulled the leadership lessons out of it. And really what drew me to this group and to him was just the fact that people were excited about and wanted to sharpen their sword. They wanted to become better leaders. And as you know, at the academy or, really any college, you're very busy and your time is pulled in, 10,000 different directions. But the very most important thing we were there to learn is how to become officers. And there really wasn't, I think, an intense as focus as the Dragon had on that. And to do it in a community of other folks, other cadets that were, wanting to work on their leadership was really powerful as well. So I felt mentored not only by Dale, but mentored by my peers, inside of this group that we had. And some of them are still some of my best friends. And then the continuation of mentoring at the gathering, I think, is really important. And so it's this idea of being a lifelong learner and a lifelong sword sharpener. And I think we have to do that. So much of what we do as leaders is tackling the urgent. And I think it was Eisenhower that sort of had the matrix of urgent and important. And you do have to do important, urgent things. But as much of your time as you can spend on those non-urgent but important things, and in this case, becoming a better leader is really important. And you're right. He used questions, and we watch a movie, and he'd ask, what do you think about this? And so not only was he teaching us leadership lessons, but he was teaching us how to think. And I thought that was really important. And so his mentorship, and I think this is one of the important things about mentorship, is not only do you get a lot out of it, but there are seeds that are planted that offer exponential return. And so he planted in my brain how important it was to continue to learn and how important it was to help other people continue to learn, because he was dedicating his time. He wasn't paid for this, it was time out of his own schedule. And so he was mentoring me on how to be a mentor as well as mentoring me on how to be a leader. And so, that's been really important. I think that really I break mentorship out into sort of three different areas, or I would say how we grow other leaders into three different areas, mentoring being one of them. I think coaching is another thing, and then advocating. And so advocating is, you see great people all around you all the time. Some are in your organization, some are not. But being able to help those people get in the right jobs and those jobs be filled with the right people, I really think that that's one of the biggest legacies as a leader you will do. And this isn't sort of like, hey, we're just going to help the people out, that we like. No, this is about making your organization great by getting great people into the right jobs. So I think that's an important part. The other part is coaching. And there's a misunderstanding, I think, in general. People think of a coach as the person on the sidelines, maybe calling the plays. If you were to take a Harvard Business School on coaching, they would teach you how to not make an imperative statement, to ask questions, and to draw out from somebody, the answers. And, in my transition to retirement, I got a coach, and it was really exciting. And this was someone, that had not even walked an inch in my shoes, really. They hadn't been in the military, but they just knew how to ask the right questions. They've been very helpful in my transition. If you want to learn how to play tennis, you get a tennis coach. So someone that can pull out your best, that asks the right questions, I think is really important. And then there's mentoring. And I think mentoring is when you're actually taking from your experiences and actually providing, hey, this is what worked for me and this is what didn't, and why. You're sort of giving them the formulas, and you're like a walking history book to them and you're trying to teach them and grow them. And so I actually break it out, and I'm very specific with it too. When I meet with people, I call it moaching, because they're going to get some
Mm-hmm.
coaching from me and some mentoring. In other words,
Mm-hmm.
I'll spend some time just asking, well, what do you think about this? And how did you feel about this? And what strikes you as important about this? And I'll ask them a lot of questions. And then I'll be very specific. I'll be like, hey, I'd like to just switch and offer you some thoughts from my background. And that's when I put my mentoring hat on, and I'll go through some tidbits. And the feedback I've gotten is people think that that's very valuable to actually do both of those things. And so A, it's important. B, I think there's some nuances in how you do it that can be really important. And who they are as a person shows up at work and at home. And so a lot of times I've found some breakthroughs in helping people solve problems by just asking, well, how would you solve a similar problem at home? Or what are some issues that you haven't been able to solve that you're working on at home and at work? And then when we look at those, we actually find that they're the same person and they're showing up, in a certain way in each one of those areas that's very similar. And the fix is actually very similar as well, although, the context of how that plays out is differently. So anyways, those are some thoughts. I very much think it's important. And in the end, I guess, Drew, to kind of put a bow on that question would be, I think of it more as apprenticeship. Like if I could put, an overarching title, I would put apprenticeship on that. And it needs to have components of modeling, of scaling, of fading, and of coaching. And so I like Mr. Miyagi. Some of our listeners probably haven't seen The Karate Kid. Go back and watch it. It's a great movie. But, Daniel San, right, is this budding karate kid, if you will. And he runs across this very old gentleman who he doesn't suspect is a master, or maybe he does, I can't remember. But he teaches him how to paint the fence, and he shows him, exactly how to move his hands. And he's like, man, this is slave labor. Like, I came here to learn karate. And then he shows him how to sand the deck, and he shows him exactly how to make circles with the sandpaper. And then I think wash the cars, the other one. I can't remember. But Daniel San's like, dude, I'm tired of working for you, man. I want to learn karate. And then he starts throwing some punches. And, he's doing paint the fence to block it, or sand the deck to block a kick. And then you see Mr. Miyagi kind of fade into the background and let him go into this tournament. And then he helps him through that tournament. And so leadership, I think, is best passed on through an apprenticeship model. I think education's important, training's important, mentoring is important. But in the end, I think we as leaders need to take on this sort of, I'm going to use apprenticeship. I'm going to take the people, that I interact with, and I'm going to really pour myself into them and kind of use that model, scale, fade, and then coach mantra. So just some thoughts on that.
Yeah. I like the fact that you pointed out that there should be a process that a mentor has or a leader has. And be honest, I don't know that we think about that a lot. We tend, I think, maybe to just go into those engagements and perhaps a little underprepared, but making sure that we have a roadmap for that person, I think, is part of the mentor's responsibility. If you're going to spend that time with a protege, an apprentice, if you will, there is a responsibility to chart the course with them. And as you said, map it out, and to know where they're at, because that's what the questions do. That's what the coaching aspect of that does, right? Is to say, hey, let me confirm where you're at on the map, because I don't know your perspective fully, and I want to hear what that's like. And so that is the mentor's role, which is so often the opposite of what we like to do, which is just dish out advice based on our experience, right? Which tends to be the model so many times.
Yeah, it's a relationship, like you just described. It's a relationship, and they need to learn about you and where do you come from, because you're not exactly like them. And so some of your advice is based on where you've been and not fully applicable to them. So yeah, I like how you describe, understand where they are, understand where they want to go, what are their hopes and dreams, and make sure it's relational. So I think you're exactly spot on.
Yeah. Yeah. And to call. We've had, we always, I mean, I do feel like too that about reaching out to somebody and I say, well, they're too busy or they won't have time for this question or whatnot. But really, and as Dale has said, that is the protege's responsibility, is to reach up and to seek out that mentorship. It is a two-way street.
Yeah.
Well, that's good.
Absolutely.
So just to close, start to bring it to a close here. You mentioned your transition and out of active duty here and into just, I mean, a host of opportunities on the backside. So as you're going through that transition now, what surprised you? What have you seen, and what should leaders expect as they go through that transition off of active duty?
Right. Yeah, it's been a wonderful transition, and I didn't think it was going to be wonderful, but it really is. And so I would go into it, again, mindset is so critical. I would go into it as this is an exciting opportunity, and there's lots there. I mean, there really is. The next chapter, and to have that opportunity as a military member, one of the big opportunities is the pension we have that really frees us up to do a lot of things. That's, on the financial side. We've been trained in incredible ways, and we've been given an incredible tool set of how to lead, how to follow, how to execute. And so you are so enabled and equipped, it's amazing. And so to be able to then, turn the page and write a new chapter is really a cool opportunity. And so I would go in there with a lot of excitement and a lot of focus on how do I learn, right? Instead of I need to go on this direction, like if I wanted to swim to an island, east of where I am, is swimming west bad? No, I'm learning how to swim. And then I can apply those skills to then swim to the island I want to swim to. So having this idea of just continuing to learn, I think really is helpful in that. And like you said, you mentioned, as a protege reaching up, there are all kinds of folks that have gone before you. Every day someone's retiring, every month someone's retiring, and they are so willing, the military and the family and the network that you've built up is just really incredible. And I'll tell you, everybody I reached out was just head over heels interested in helping me out and spent way more than I even asked for, and sometimes even took me out to lunch when I told them I was going to take them out for lunch, just because they were so excited to help out. And so it was really neat. Now, you asked what was the most surprising thing, and the most surprising thing for me was how real and tangible and continuing, I don't know what the right word is, your military family is. And so I literally felt like I was a lieutenant back in a flying squadron. And even a lot of the same people that were my mentors, my flight commanders, my squadron commanders, my weapons officers, my teachers, when I was a lieutenant, are now fulfilling those same roles as, Brook Leonard, chapter 2, getting into business and trying to understand this piece out. They've walked that path, and now they're pouring themselves back into me. And I literally feel like I'm a lieutenant again in many ways. So and I'm messing up and learning a lot, but also I feel very taken care of, and I feel very looked after, and I feel like I have lots of comrades in arms in this next chapter. People walking beside me, people that I can turn around and help, and then people that are helping me because they've been there, done that. And they're advocating for me, they're mentoring me, they're coaching me. And so it's like, and the military family goes on, And so I was really not looking forward to losing that family. I felt like, I can't wear the uniform again. I can't, show up at work. They took away all my security clearances, and all your badges and things like that. But that's not really what it's all about. The family isn't about, what you wear around your neck or what kind of uniform you wear. It's the relationships that you've built.
Yeah.
And I just felt like, for one, wow, what a great time it's been building those relationships and the times we've had and the memories we've made. That's great. And then now it goes on. We're continuing to make memories. They're a little different. We're continuing to help each other out. And so to me, like, just how amazing that is, the amazing family that you have, and the fact that they're still going to be there for you and continue to help out in practical ways, and that you get to continue to add to that family. Just the amount and how awesome that was surprising to me, and obviously very welcomed. So I really enjoyed that. Yeah, it was really neat. I do think that you can expect to go through ups and downs. You're charging really hard. Everybody is in their career in the military and serving our nation. And it's hard I had 3 jobs. I had the job I was doing at Space Command. I had to figure out, what I was going to do after I was retired. And then I had the job of actually completing all the retirement forms and process. And it's just hard.
Yeah.
As much as you can do ahead of time to try to take those 3 jobs and start minimizing or spreading out the impact of 1 or 2 of those, can really cut down on your stress level. So I think that's important to be cognizant of. And then just figuring out the unknown. And you're a kid again. You're a lieutenant again, right? You're a newlywed again. Like however, you're starting over. But at the same time, you're not wearing, diapers anymore. In other words, people look at you and they expect you to have it all together, but you have to learn. And so reaching out, figuring out who can teach you, reading books, whatever you can do to sort of, kind of start back over on that learning journey, and be humble enough to understand that while you've learned a lot and some of those things will carry over, there are some new skills you need to learn in one way or the other. If it's not just how to dress and, pick out clothes
right.
for the first time in your life. But it's been really wonderful. And again, I look back on my career and the opportunities as really great. But it's people, and those people are still around, and they're still part of my family. And so, that's just been wonderful, and it really makes all the difference in the world.
I hadn't heard somebody articulate it that way, in the continuing military family that goes on to support you. I appreciate you saying that. It reinforces the idea that's been cemented in my mind that relationships are the currency of the profession, and that they continue on after you build them in the military that's encouraging, right? We can continue to lean on each other. That's good. Well, I thank you for taking the time to do this and sharing your insight with the military leader community. They're tuning in we have folks from all over the world that plug into this. And what I like about the leadership conversation is that it's evergreen, because you can talk about leadership whether you're on the ground in the infantry, whether you're in a boardroom, or whether you're in the cockpit at 30,000 feet. There's still some aspect of leading and influencing that must be present in order for people to do the things that they need to do for whatever mission they're on. And so thank you for offering just a ton of advice for those people who are out there. I'll encourage everyone listening here, put these lessons into practice. You've got to do something with what you learn as a leader, and otherwise it just sits in your notebook and it lies dormant. And so take this, reflect on it, and then I encourage you to share it with your team. This can be a catalyst for a conversation that you and your team might need to have, whether it's in any one of the areas we've discussed. Take the meeting segment, for example. Let's go back to that and say, all right, let's just listen to this 10-minute clip here, and let's talk about how we do meetings. Is there anything that we can pull away from this so that we can become better? I promise you, your team needs to hear it, because if it's not, meetings aren't something we're good at typically. That's right. But we talked about a ton of things here that could be added value, and then share it on social media as well. We appreciate anyone sharing these lessons and getting the word out, because the whole goal of this effort is to drop insight into people's lives that can make them better leaders. So again, thank you for taking the time to do this. How can people connect with you to discuss either business opportunities or whatever you have going on?
Drew, that'd be awesome. First of all, thanks for having me. It was quite an honor. And I'll tell you, I'm just so impressed with how you are not only continuing to serve our country, but also continuing to provide this wonderful resource for all the leaders and putting money where your mouth is. I know you lead well in your current role. I know you've done that before, but then also, to take time to do this podcast, and it's really a great tool. So just good on you, man. I'm cheering for you.
Appreciate it.
And yeah, absolutely. And to get in contact with me, I'm absolutely serious. I love helping people out, answering questions, any way that I can be of service to anybody that's listening to this podcast. I'd love to do that. I'm on LinkedIn, Brook Leonard, BrookLeonard. So shoot me a message on that. Or email is Brook, and I would love to, be able to help you out. A lot of people have helped me, and I definitely want to pass that along. So thank you very much.
Yeah, well, thanks again so much. Good luck as you continue the transition here into other opportunities, and thanks for your time. I may not see you at the gathering this year, but hopefully, hopefully, I enjoyed the time on the ski lift with you. I appreciate that.
Absolutely.
All right. Take care.
All right. See ya.